The first hours of Second El Alamein revealed that the battle would not be decided by a clean rush of tanks into open desert. It would be decided in the Devil's Gardens, the name British soldiers used for the great Axis minefields that lay across the front like a hidden, man-made wilderness. These were not neat strips of explosives that could be crossed quickly by following one obvious gap. They were deep belts of mines, wire, booby traps, defensive posts, artillery targets, and anti-tank killing zones designed to slow an attacker until he became visible, crowded, and vulnerable. The Devil's Gardens matter because they show armored warfare at its least glamorous and most practical. Before tanks could move, men had to crawl, probe, lift, mark, guide, repair, and keep routes open under fire.
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The Axis minefields were part of a defensive system, not a separate obstacle placed in front of the real battle. German and Italian commanders knew that Montgomery had more tanks, more artillery, and a growing advantage in the air. They could not easily match the Eighth Army's material strength in a long, open fight. Their best hope was to force British power into narrow channels, slow it down, and strike it when it lost freedom of movement. Mines did exactly that. A minefield could break a tank, but it could also break timing. It could make an attacking formation arrive late, split neighboring units, trap vehicles in traffic, and leave infantry waiting for support that could not reach them. In mechanized war, delay can kill. To imagine the Devil's Gardens properly, it helps to forget the idea of one simple line. The belts were irregular and layered, made from anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines, wire, dummy gaps, real gaps, abandoned positions, and defended strongpoints. Some mines were buried deeply enough to be hard to find. Others were placed where engineers might naturally try to work. The ground was often hard, stony, and confusing in darkness, and the boundaries of danger were never as clean as a map suggested. The Eighth Army had surveyed, patrolled, photographed, and studied the enemy's defenses, but no amount of planning could remove uncertainty. A soldier in the minefield did not experience it as a diagram. He experienced it as a dark patch of desert where every step and every wheel might be the wrong one. Engineers carried the burden of turning uncertainty into movement. Their work required nerve of a special kind because it was slow at the very moment when everyone wanted speed. They had to locate mines by sight, touch, detector, memory, and training, then lift or neutralize them without creating more danger for the men behind. They had to mark the edges of lanes so that infantry, anti-tank guns, trucks, and tanks could follow in darkness. They had to widen routes enough for armored movement, and then keep those routes from collapsing under traffic. This was not the work of men standing aside from the battle. They were in the battle's throat, often under artillery, machine gun fire, mortar fire, and the pressure of knowing that whole formations were waiting behind them. Traffic control became one of the hidden dramas of the opening battle. A cleared lane was precious, and too many vehicles needed to use it at once. Tanks, carriers, ambulances, ammunition trucks, anti-tank guns, command vehicles, and recovery equipment all had reasons to move forward or backward through the same narrow spaces. Darkness made spacing difficult. Dust blurred markers, and shell fire could scatter guides or tear up signs. One disabled vehicle could become a roadblock. One driver who lost the lane could strike a mine and halt everything behind him. It is easy to speak of armored divisions as if they move like a single body, but inside the Devil's Gardens, they moved like a long, vulnerable column, trying to thread a needle while the enemy fired at the hand holding it. The infantry had already crossed parts of the minefields on foot, but that did not make the way safe for armor. Operation Lightfoot rested on the idea that infantry could pass over many anti-tank mines without triggering them, seize objectives, and allow engineers to open routes behind them. In practice, infantry still faced anti-personnel mines, wire, defensive fire, and disorientation. Once they reached their objectives, they had to hold them while waiting for the heavier weapons that made a position survivable against counterattack. Anti-tank guns had to be dragged forward, ammunition had to arrive, communications had to be established. A captured patch of desert was not secure merely because men had reached it. It became secure only when the whole supporting system caught up. For tank crews, the minefield lanes were places of intense vulnerability. Tanks are designed to move, and a tank that cannot maneuver loses much of its protection. In a lane, the driver had to follow guides and markers rather than choose the best ground. The commander had to watch for signals, enemy fire, mines, and other vehicles, all while sitting in a crowded column with limited visibility. If the lead tank stopped, the column stopped. If a mine exploded, the crew might survive, but the lane could be blocked and the vehicles behind forced to wait under fire. The heavy armor and guns that made tanks formidable in open country offered only partial comfort when movement was reduced to a slow crawl through a marked path.
The Axis defenders understood this well. Their anti-tank guns did not need to destroy every tank in the Eighth Army. They needed to hit enough vehicles at the right places to increase congestion and fear. German 88mm guns, smaller anti-tank weapons, field guns, mortars, and machine guns were all part of the defensive web. Some guns survived the opening barrage and waited for targets to appear. Others fired into likely lanes, even when visibility was poor, because the minefields made British movement predictable. The defenders were not merely sitting behind the mines. They were using the mines to shape the battle, to slow the attackers until weapons could find them. That is why the Devil's Gardens were not passive ground. They were active instruments of defense.
The Eighth Army's artillery tried to suppress those instruments. Barrages, counter-battery fire, and defensive fire tasks were designed to keep enemy gunners down and disrupt counterattacks. Yet artillery could not identify every hidden gun, and it could not clear every mine. The same was true of air power. Allied aircraft could strike movement behind the front and reduce Axis freedom, but they could not make the immediate passage through the minefields simple. The battle therefore became a layered contest. Artillery opened space, infantry entered it, engineers shaped it, tanks tried to move through it, and the enemy worked to close it again. Each layer depended on the others, and any weakness in one layer could delay the whole offensive. The medical and recovery work inside and around the minefields was grim. Wounded men had to be carried back through lanes that were hard enough for the unwounded to follow. Ambulances and medical carriers risked mines and shell fire as they moved forward. Recovery crews had to decide whether a disabled tank could be pulled clear, repaired, or abandoned, and those decisions could affect the entire route behind it. A tank blown off its track was not only a casualty, it was also an obstacle. A wounded engineer was not only a human loss, he was also a loss of skill at the exact point where skill was scarce. The Devil's Gardens turned every casualty and every breakdown into part of the battle's larger mechanical problem. The frustration of the opening nights came from the gap between entry and passage. The Eighth Army had broken into the Axis defenses, but the minefields prevented the clean release of armored power that Montgomery wanted. Reports from the front described lanes opened, lanes blocked, objectives reached, objectives uncertain, vehicles delayed, and units not where headquarters expected them to be. This was not unusual in battle, but at El Alamein, the consequences were especially serious because the plan depended on sequence.
If infantry advanced but tanks did not pass, the attack became shallow. If tanks crowded forward but could not deploy, they became targets. If engineers cleared lanes but markers vanished, the work had to be repeated under worse conditions.
The Devil's Gardens teach one of the central lessons of 20th century armored warfare. Obstacles are not just physical barriers, but weapons aimed at time, confidence, and coordination. A mine costs far less than a tank, yet it can stop a tank long enough for a gun to destroy it. A narrow lane can reduce an armored brigade to a column of waiting machines. A hidden belt of explosives can separate infantry from armor and turn a planned breakthrough into a series of local fights. The answer was not simply more tanks. The answer was engineers, rehearsals, route discipline, artillery suppression, recovery vehicles, and commanders willing to keep pressure on the defense even when the first movement bogged down. The battle in the Devil's Gardens was therefore not a sideshow before the real armored battle. It was the real armored battle in its most revealing form. Tanks could not fight effectively until the ground allowed them to move, and the ground would not allow movement until engineers and infantry made it possible at great cost. The Eighth Army's material superiority had to pass through lanes measured in yards, marked by tape, lamps, and courage, and contested by enemy fire. El Alamein's fame often rests on the idea of a breakthrough, but before any breakthrough could happen, there had to be a break-in. In the Devil's Gardens, the Eighth Army learned again that modern mechanized power begins with human beings making a path through danger.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.